The first and I think foundational and core thing that we have to ask ourselves when it comes to any policy that we think about or implement when it comes to voting is how is this making our voting process more accessible to more residents and helping to make sure that voters are able to access the ballot. And when it comes to voter ID, it actually is a barrier because not everyone has an ID. And the people who tend to not have identification actually tend to be those who are people of color, people with disabilities, people who are returning citizens, and some of our most vulnerable communities who we really want to ensure have full access to participate in the fabric of our society.
If you go out into the world and you ask the average voter what they think about voter ID, they're going to say they think it's a good idea. They believe in election security. They believe in fairness. In fact, some of the recent polling that's been done shows that up to 80% of people polled believe in voter ID and think it's a good idea. So I think it's more controversial kind of in the political class within the legislatures, between the two parties, that it really is controversial among voters.
The question that I would ask and what I think the challenge is and why we have rejected voter ID here in Maryland is that we have not had issues or challenges in this state with people coming in to vote at the polls who are not who they say they are or voting twice. The challenge that we actually have is wanting to make sure that more people come out. So I think that our efforts should really focus on how we reduce barriers, how we turn out the vote, how we engage residents in the way that they want to participate. And efforts should really focus in on that, as opposed to how can we create this identification where, at least in the state of Maryland, it's not as if we are seeing this issue where people are pretending to be other people, or we're seeing people come in droves where we have concerns around making sure that we have identification, that we need to implement something that actually creates a challenge that we have to work around in terms of people being able to come in and vote.
Well, sure, they can. And let me just give you some details about what North Carolina did. First of all, there are dozens and dozens of types of IDs that qualify in North Carolina, from municipal employee IDs to university IDs, any federal ID, state driver's licenses, passports. And if a voter doesn't have an ID, then we'll provide you one. So we've provided funding so that in all 100 counties at the Board of Elections, the voter can come and get a free ID for the purposes of voting. And if you're unable to go physically to the Board of Elections, which maybe some people have a difficult time traveling, then we've provided funding so that there can be mobile options where we can come to you. We can go to your house and provide you an ID.
Voter ID legislation, historically, it really challenges and impacts and prevents the opportunity to vote, specifically for those who are most vulnerable in our community. And when it comes to election security, there have not been, in the state of Maryland, there have not been signs that point to a need to institute identification in order to solve some kind of challenge that is happening. I would argue that the problem all across the country is that we need to inspire and educate and determine how we can structure our laws so that more people come out to vote and participate in our society and our elections and know who we are as elected officials and what we're doing on our behalf.
Absolutely. And in fact, most of them agree. There's at least 36 states that have enacted voter ID laws of some form or another. North Carolina is one of those, and President Biden's state of Delaware has voter ID laws. So we think it's a good way to enhance voter confidence. And in North Carolina, we've done a lot of we have an expansive opportunities to vote in North Carolina. We have one of the longest early voting periods in the country. We have one of the longest absentee mail-in voting processes in the country.
Absolutely. We should have as many secure ways to vote as possible. And we have done a lot in the state of Maryland to expand mail-in voting. I was actually the main sponsor of a piece of legislation called the Permanent Mail-in Ballot List, and that allows a voter to opt in to permanently receive their mail-in ballot in every single election. Having all of those options available to our voters, I think, is really, really important to having a strong election, a secure election, and also an accessible election.
All of our early voting methods pre-existed voter ID. So voter ID has just been overlaid on this process so that whether you vote early, vote on election day, or vote by mail, you still have to provide a form of ID. We feel like that all voters have to be treated the same in that regard.
Historically, we have needed the federal government to step in, and that is still the case now. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 has been under assault by the courts and also by the states for decades now. And we know that we need solutions from the federal government to ensure that there is access to strong early voting, that people are not facing the long lines and the intentional laws and changing of the polling locations and things like that that deter people from voting and prevent them from being able to vote. So our country should definitely be one that has the most freedom in the entire world around the freedom to vote and the ability to vote and access the ballot. And we do need the federal government to step in and create a threshold, a floor around what voting in the United States looks like. So I do support the federal government weighing in a positive way that helps to advance the freedom to vote.
Especially in the state legislatures, when we see the gridlock that occurs in Washington, we think that we're better suited to solve problems and address needs in a faster manner than the federal government can, and with less acrimony. So on top of that, the U.S. Constitution clearly gives states the right to set the time, manner, and place of elections. And so I think that it's probably better left to the states for us to craft our own methods.